I knew something was off the second I opened my fridge and the light didn't come on. The silence in my house was too quiet, the kind of quiet you only get when the power's out. I checked the fuse box. Everything looked fine. That's when I stepped outside and saw the severed cable, cleanly cut near the junction box like someone had taken garden shears to it. I'm Hudson Zeller, retired paramedic, part-time contractor, and full-time pain in the neck for our HOA president, Francine Penley. Francine, imagine a woman who talks like she's permanently filing a complaint with God himself. Blonde bob, over-accessorized, and always armed with a clipboard. She thinks she's the queen of our cul-de-sac. Thing is, she's not just some cranky neighbor. Francine runs the HOA board like a petty dictatorship, backed by her little committee of busybodies. No renovation went unnoticed, no trash bin left unscolded. I once got a warning for having my porch light too aggressively bright. I knew she hated the solar panels I installed last spring. Claimed they were aesthetic sabotage. But they were fully within code. I double-checked the CC and Articus and even got city approval. She tried fining me anyway. I appealed one, and that seemed to light a fire under her, but cutting my power, that was a whole new level. I crouched by the cable and took photos. Whoever did this had known exactly what they were doing. The cut was deliberate, not a chew from some animal. I followed the line back to the side of the house and found fresh footprints in the mulch. Women's size, small, Francine's size. I wasn't going to accuse her without proof. So I went inside, powered up my security camera system using my backup generator, and pulled the footage. There she was. Clear as daylight at 7:15 that morning, crouched by the box in her ridiculous pink tracksuit, snipping the line like she was trimming roses. I called the police. Officer Draper was professional, didn't flinch when I showed him the footage. "You know her?" he asked. Francine Penley. President of the HOA. "Of course she is," he muttered, writing notes. While he filled out the report, I made more copies of the footage, USB drive, cloud storage, 2 hard copies. I wasn't going to let this get buried under HOA nonsense. Later that evening, Francine came marching up my driveway with her usual fake concern plastered on her face. "Hudson, dear, I heard you had a power issue. So sorry to hear. Perhaps your system malfunctioned." I crossed my arms. "You mean the system you personally cut this morning?" Her smile twitched. "Excuse me." I stepped aside and pointed to the camera mounted above the garage. Caught everything in high definition. She didn't say a word, just turned on her heel and walked off stiff as a statue. She didn't get far before Officer Draper showed up at her door with a pair of handcuffs and a citation for criminal tampering and property damage. And that was just the beginning. The morning after Francine was cited, the neighborhood felt different, tense, like the air before a thunderstorm. No one waved from across the street, curtains twitched. People avoided eye contact like they were waiting to see who'd be next on her warpath. But I wasn't interested in being part of the gossip circuit. I had a bigger problem. My power hadn't been restored and the generator was running on fumes. I headed straight to the city utilities office after calling in a work order. The technician on duty, a guy named Ruddy with a sunburned neck and an armful of tattoos, raised an eyebrow when he pulled up my address. "You're flagged," he said, tapping at his keyboard. "Service hold placed by third-party notice. Says here the request came from your HOA. They filed a claim alleging unauthorized modifications to the grid." I leaned over the counter. "That's not even remotely legal. I have all the permits." "They can't just shut off a resident's utilities on a whim." Ruddy nodded slowly. "Doesn't smell right to me either. I'll escalate it to my supervisor. In the meantime, I'll get someone out there to reconnect you. Might take a few hours." While I waited, I drove over to City Hall. I needed a copy of the HOA's bylaws, on file the ones they'd submitted when they first formed. I'd already read the ones they distributed to residents, but I had a growing suspicion they doctored them. The clerk, a no-nonsense woman in her late 40s with a nameplate reading Gloria Mendez, tapped her pen against the desk as she looked me up. "Zeller, you're not the first one asking about Penley's board." She slid a manila folder across to me. "These are the original articles they filed with the city when they incorporated. You'll want pages 5 through 8. I flipped through, scanning for discrepancies. They were subtle phrases tweaked, clauses missing. Their distributed version claimed the board had authority to override utility modifications if deemed a visual nuisance. That line didn't exist in the legally recorded version. I looked up. Have any other residents filed complaints? Gloria glanced around and lowered her voice. 3 in the last year. 2 moved out. 1 tried to sue, but the board buried her in legal fees. She withdrew. I thanked her, took the copies, and headed straight to my friend Maya's office. She's a real estate attorney, sharp as a tack and allergic to bureaucracy. I hadn't planned to get her involved, but this wasn't just about me anymore. She skimmed the documents, then leaned back in her chair. They're committing document fraud, and if they're filing false claims to utility companies, that's wire fraud too. If you're serious, I can contact the district attorney. But once we start, it won't stay quiet. I'm counting on it, I said. That afternoon, while the utility crew reconnected my power, Maya drafted a formal complaint to the county prosecutor's office. She included the video of Francine cutting the cable, the falsified bylaws, and an affidavit from Ruddy confirming the unauthorized service hold. We also contacted the state HOA Oversight Division to report the discrepancies. Francine must have caught wind of what was coming, because the very next morning I received a letter hand-delivered, no postage from the HOA's legal counsel. It was printed on cheap office paper and riddled with typos. The letter accused me of defaming the integrity of the board and demanded I cease all legal action or face a community-wide special assessment to recover costs incurred by my disruption. I brought it straight to Maya. "This isn't even a real firm," she said, pointing to the fake letterhead. "There's no license number, no bar registration. It's a scare tactic." The scare tactic backfired. Maya forwarded the letter to the DA's office with a note about potential impersonation of legal authority. The assistant prosecutor called her within hours, requesting a meeting. By the end of the week, subpoenas were issued to the HOA board members for financial records, communications, and internal meeting minutes. Francine's perfect facade started to crumble. It turned out she'd been using HOA funds for personal purchases, spa days, high-end furniture, even a retreat at a vineyard that coincided with her cousin's wedding. But the real bombshell came when the HOA treasurer, a nervous man named Curtis, who always wore loafers with no socks, flipped. He handed over a thumb drive containing years of internal emails, showing how Francine had deliberately targeted specific residents to pressure them into moving out, usually those who refused to beautify their properties to her standards. One email read, "Zeller's panels are an eyesore. I don't care what the permits say. If he won't leave, we make it unbearable until he does." That email was read aloud during the preliminary hearing. Francine sat stone-faced as the judge ordered a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances and froze their accounts pending investigation. Without access to operating funds, the board couldn't pay their attorney fees. Their insurance carrier dropped them after the fraud allegations, and residents began demanding a full recall vote. I stayed out of the neighborhood politics. I was focused on repairs, real ones. A few neighbors, emboldened by what had happened, came by to help. We replaced my cut wiring, repainted my utility box, and even installed new motion cameras across the yard. One neighbor, Lewis, brought over a fresh batch of tamales and said, "You broke the spell, man." People were scared of her for years. By the time the audit concluded, the board was drowning in mismanaged funds, unauthorized expenditures, and fake fines. Francine had been using the HOA as her personal slush fund. The DA filed charges for fraud, embezzlement, and criminal misrepresentation. She accepted a plea deal to avoid jail time, community service, and full restitution. That restitution came out of the HOA's reserve fund, which barely covered half the amount she owed. To plug the gap, the board had to cancel all non-essential services, suspend landscaping contracts, and refund every citation issued under false pretenses. Residents demanded new leadership, and a full vote dissolved the existing board entirely. Maya helped draft a new charter, one that required transparent elections, open financial disclosures, and strict term limits. I didn't run for office, but I helped build the new website and security protocols. The neighborhood didn't change overnight, but it felt cleaner, more honest. Kids played outside more, people waved again. Francine's house went up for sale 2 months later. The listing described it as a charming home in a peaceful, well-managed community. I left a comment under the listing. Buyer beware, check the bylaws. No one responded. They didn't need to. Everyone already knew. The morning after Francine officially stepped down, I found a flyer tucked under my windshield wiper. It was printed in color, unusually glossy for a neighborhood handout. At the top, in bold purple letters, Community Unity Town Hall meeting tonight. The invite came from a group of residents calling themselves the Restoration Committee. I hadn't heard of them yet, but judging by the names listed at the bottom, Lewis, a few of the younger couples from the East End, and even Curtis, the ex-treasurer who had flipped it, was legitimate. I wasn't sure what I was walking into, but I went. They held it at the community center, a squat beige building that had spent more years as a storage unit than a gathering space. Rows of folding chairs filled the main room, and almost every seat was taken. The air buzzed with cautious energy. Some folks looked angry. A few looked embarrassed. But most just looked ready. Lewis nodded when he saw me and gestured to the front row. "We saved you a seat," he said. "You might want to hear this firsthand." Curtis stood at the projector, hands shaking slightly as he adjusted the laptop. He didn't wait for silence. "I was part of it," he said. "I didn't steal anything myself, but I signed off on a lot of things that weren't right. I know that. I can't undo it, but I can show you what else I found." He clicked the first slide. A spreadsheet appeared, transaction records sorted by date. At first, it looked like standard operating costs. But then he zoomed in on a cluster of transfers labeled Capital Improvement Disbursement. The amounts were staggering. Thousands withdrawn at irregular intervals, all authorized by Francine and funneled through a secondary HOA account that had never been disclosed in the annual budget reports. "She created a shadow account," Curtis continued. "It wasn't on the books. It's where the money from fines, special assessments, and permit fees actually went. We thought these were just line items, but she rerouted them before they hit the main ledger." Murmurs rippled through the room. Someone in the back muttered under their breath, and a couple of chairs scraped as people shifted forward. "I found something worse," Curtis said. 2 months before she cut Hudson's power, she authorized a payment labeled Security Infrastructure Upgrade. $28,000. He clicked again. A grainy photo appeared, rows of small black devices tucked into what looked like electrical enclosures. Curtis zoomed in. They were signal jammers, short-range blockers designed to disrupt Wi-Fi, cellular reception, and in some cases, even solar inverters. Not only illegal, but dangerous if placed near emergency systems. She installed them in 5 homes, he said. All of them belonged to residents who had either refused to pay fines or contested board decisions. The devices were hidden in irrigation boxes and landscaping features. They didn't just cut people off, they interfered with medical devices, home alarms, and communications. My throat tightened. I'd noticed my emergency radio cutting out sporadically, but I'd assumed it was just interference from the construction site across the highway. Now it made sense. Lewis stood up. "We already contacted the city's public safety division. They confirmed the devices are a violation of federal communications law." Another voice interrupted. It was Officer Draper, standing by the door in plainclothes. "We also contacted the FCC," he said. "They're opening a federal investigation." The devices were transmitting on restricted frequencies. That's not just a code violation, it's a felony. The room fell silent all at once. Draper walked forward, nodding to Curtis. "We've got a warrant to seize any remaining equipment. If you think you've got one of these on your property, contact us immediately. We'll be going door to door this week." He paused, then turned to me. "Hudson, your footage helped establish probable cause. You didn't just catch her cutting a power line. You kicked the hornet's nest wide open." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The look on people's faces said it all. For the first time, they weren't skeptical or afraid or waiting for someone else to take the heat. They were furious and ready to act. The following morning, I joined a team of volunteers combing through old HOA documents. We set up folding tables in Lewis's garage and worked in shifts. Permits, invoices, meeting minutes, every paper trail we could find was laid out and cataloged. Maya stopped by with a paralegal from her firm to help organize things for the class action filing. One folder contained internal emails from the board's communications director, a woman named Cheryl who had mysteriously relocated 2 weeks before the audit. In one exchange, she confirmed that Francine had ordered the installation of the jammers under the guise of noise mitigation devices. The contractor she hired wasn't licensed, just a guy she knew from her yoga class who did tech stuff on the side. The criminal case escalated fast. Between the financial fraud, utility tampering, and federal communications violations, the state attorney general's office stepped in. Francine was arrested at her sister's house in Palm Springs, where she had apparently fled after the first subpoena. The arrest made the local news. Her mugshot ran next to phrases like suburban embezzlement queen and HOA from hell. The rest of the board tried to distance themselves, claiming ignorance. But the investigation revealed that most of them had benefited in some way: discounted dues, waived assessments, unauthorized reimbursements. The prosecutor offered plea bargains to 2 of them in exchange for testimony. The HOA, as a legal entity, was imploding. With frozen accounts and no board to manage operations, the community petitioned the city to dissolve it entirely. That required a 75% approval vote. We hit 92. City Council approved the dissolution and appointed a temporary management service to oversee shared infrastructure until a long-term solution could be arranged. Street repairs, landscaping contracts, and security patrols were placed under municipal oversight. It wasn't perfect, but it was a clean break. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. There were still things to fix, systems to recalibrate, forms to file, fences to mend, but the weight that had sat on the neighborhood for years was gone. 3 weeks later, I stood in my garage, installing a new inverter panel for a neighbor whose power system had been compromised. He was a retired bus driver named Carl, quiet but sharp. As I tightened the last mounting bracket, he handed me a folded envelope. Inside was a hand-drawn thank you card signed by 8 families and a gift card to the local hardware store. "You didn't have to go through all this trouble," Carl said. "But you did. Most of us were just trying to keep our heads down. You didn't." I looked around. Kids rode scooters down the sidewalk. Someone was grilling on their patio. A couple of teenagers were installing a little free library by the park gate. "Someone had to," I said. Francine's trial was scheduled for the fall. She faced multiple charges: wire fraud, obstruction of municipal services, conspiracy to commit utility tampering, and violations of federal communication law. Her attorney tried to argue diminished capacity due to undue stress from volunteer leadership. The judge didn't buy it. Her sentencing hearing drew a crowd, not for vengeance but for closure. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, city officials, and a few journalists. Maya sat beside me, reviewing notes for the civil suit that would follow. When the judge read the sentence: 4 years probation, restitution of all misused funds, and a 5-year ban from serving on any residential board, the room was silent. Not disappointed, just done. Outside, as people filed out, someone started a slow clap. A few chuckled. Most just walked back to their cars, ready to go home. I didn't stick around. I had work to do. A neighbor had asked for help installing floodlights, and another wanted to know if I could recommend a good electrician. The HOA was gone. The power was back. And the neighborhood had finally found its voice. The final blow to Francine's broken empire came from a place she never expected: her own insurance carrier. It was a Tuesday morning when Maya called me. She didn't waste time with greetings. "They're suing the HOA for breach of contract and insurance fraud, and they're dragging every board member into it individually." I leaned against the tailgate of my truck, still dusty from hauling replacement siding to a neighbor's house. Wait. The insurance company. They reviewed the claim Francine filed last year for security upgrades. Turns out, she listed the jammers as perimeter surveillance devices. That's not just misleading, it's criminal misrepresentation. They paid out nearly $28,000 based on that lie. I let out a breath. So they're going after the board for reimbursement and damages, she said. They're alleging willful fraud. The HOA's umbrella policy doesn't protect against criminal activity. Meaning the board's on the hook personally. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The only thing louder than the collapse was the silence that followed. That night, I walked the perimeter of the neighborhood. A soft wind rattled the leaves. Motion lights flicked on as I passed, illuminating the fresh paint jobs, the fixed fences, the new sense of order. The place felt real again, lived in, not curated for one woman's vision. At the edge of the cul-de-sac, I found Curtis sitting on his porch, nursing a coffee that had probably gone cold hours ago. He didn't look up when I approached. "They're going to garnish my wages," he said flatly. "You turning in your statement helped build the case." "They'll consider that," he shook his head. "Doesn't matter, I still co-signed the expense reports. I should have known better. I just didn't want to rock the boat." "You're not the only one who didn't," I said. "But you're one of the few who did something when it counted." He studied me for a second, then nodded toward the driveway. "You know what she did with the first fine she ever collected? Bought a champagne bottle for the first board meeting." I raised an eyebrow. "Celebrating what? Control." He looked down at his cup. "She didn't care about the bylaws, just wanted people to stay quiet and make the place look like a brochure." I didn't reply. Sometimes silence said more than any words could. The next morning, I got a call from the interim property manager, the one appointed by the city. Her name was Tasha, sharp, no nonsense, and allergic to the kind of games Francine used to play. "We're holding a community forum this Saturday," she said. "We need someone from the neighborhood to speak about what happened, someone who knows the timeline. The residents trust you." I hesitated. I didn't like public speaking, and I wasn't interested in becoming the face of a movement. But I also knew that if the truth wasn't told clearly, someone might twist it later. "I'll be there," I said. Saturday came fast. The forum was held in the elementary school gymnasium. Folding chairs lined the polished floor, and the bleachers were filled with residents, reporters, and even a couple of city officials. At the front, a long table held stacks of documents, evidence, transcripts, audit summaries, and a thick binder labeled restitution schedule. Tasha opened the meeting with a calm but firm tone. "Today is not about blame, it's about rebuilding trust." Then she turned it over to me. I didn't use a microphone. I didn't need one. I'm not a politician. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a guy who got tired of watching people be afraid in their own homes. I told them about the morning the power went out, the footage, the investigation. I told them about the shadow account, the illegal jammers, and the people who stayed silent because they didn't think they had a choice. But the moment we started talking, I said, things changed. Not because of one person, but because the whole neighborhood decided enough was enough. The room was quiet, but not cold. People were listening. After I finished, Lewis stood and announced the formation of a new neighborhood council, not an HOA, but a volunteer advisory group. No fines, no enforcement. Just a forum for residents to bring up concerns and work together on solutions. It would be run by rotating members with open books and no executive powers. People clapped. Not the kind of forced applause Francine used to orchestrate, but real, scattered, and honest. Afterward, Meyer approached me near the exit. She handed me a folder. "Settlement terms," she said. "The board's assets won't cover everything, so the former members are entering into personal payment agreements. The court approved wage garnishments for the 3 who refused to cooperate." Curtis got the lightest terms. And Francine, she glanced toward the parking lot. "She's not coming back. Her plea deal includes a mandatory relocation clause court enforced. She can't reside in any community governed by a residential board for 5 years. I flipped through the folder. "And the civil suit closed. Everyone who paid fines under false pretenses gets a partial refund. It's not everything, but it's a start." That night, I finally took the old generator offline. I'd kept it running longer than I needed to, maybe out of habit or caution. As I shut it down and disconnected the fuel line, I realized I hadn't heard from Francine's loyalists in weeks. Most had moved out or gone quiet. A few had even apologized quietly in their own ways. One of them, a woman named Deanne who used to send out HOA newsletters with passive-aggressive quotes about lawn maintenance, left a pie on my porch with a note that just said, "I didn't know. I should have. I didn't hold grudges, but I didn't forget either." The neighborhood council met for the first time 2 weeks after the forum. They held it in someone's backyard, under string lights and with lawn chairs arranged in a circle. No titles, no gavel, just neighbors. Curtis showed up last. He didn't say much, but at the end he passed around a small envelope. Inside were receipts. He'd made his first restitution payment early. "I owed it to everyone," he said. Nobody clapped. Nobody needed to. It wasn't about praise, it was about showing up. Later, I sat on my porch, watching as the lights across the street flicked on one at a time. The hum of normalcy was back, the good kind. Lawns weren't perfect. Trash bins sometimes lingered too long. But nobody cared. Nobody was afraid. Francine's house had been sold at a loss. The new owners were a young couple with twin boys and a golden retriever that barked at every squirrel. They didn't bring cupcakes or introduce themselves with pamphlets. They just waved from their driveway and asked if I knew a good place to buy mulch. I told them I did. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it when I said, "Welcome to the neighborhood."